Please don't sign, sir. It's a trap. They're setting you up. A whisper, as urgent as a dagger, sliced through the air thick with the scent of expensive leather in Apex Dynamics' VIP boardroom. Julian Vance froze. The Mont Blanc pen, a witness to countless multi-million-dollar contracts, stopped just millimeters from the paper. The glistening black ink now hung suspended over an abyss of doubt. A suffocating silence descended upon the room. All eyes were on Julian. The usual calm on his face had given way to a fleeting look of panic. Julian felt the familiar, intimate pat on his shoulder from Marcus Thorne, his best friend and longtime partner. But the touch, suddenly, felt oddly heavy and false. "What's wrong, Julian? Everything's all set. This contract is the crowning jewel of our future," Marcus said, his voice feigning composure, but his eyes could not hide his anxiety. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Don't let a moment of impulse cost you the opportunity of a lifetime." Julian didn't answer. His mind was reeling from the recent warning. It came from Elena Reyes, the cleaning staff member, who was quietly pushing her cart toward the door. Her eyes, though humble, held a strange intelligence and resolve. Julian glanced at the Omnicorp investors. Their faces were eager, but their eyes were too sharp, hiding a secret. Elena's whisper echoed in his ears, drowning out all other sounds. Julian's certainty cracked, and that brief hesitation was enough to unnerve the entire room. "I need a few minutes," Julian announced firmly, pushing his chair back. A murmur arose. Marcus frowned. "A few minutes? Julian, we've been preparing for months. The investors have flown halfway around the world for this moment. You know you can trust me." Julian's gaze hardened as he looked directly at his friend. "Trust is a precious thing, Marcus," he replied, "but it isn't blind." He adjusted his suit jacket, stood up, and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind astonished faces and a hanging agreement. Julian's shoes echoed down the deserted marble hallway. He quickened his pace, his sharp eyes scanning for the woman in the gray uniform. He caught up to Elena just as she was about to push her cleaning cart into the staff elevator. "You," he called, his voice carrying the authority and coldness characteristic of a CEO. The young woman flinched and stopped. Her shoulders trembled slightly, but a look of resolve quickly replaced the momentary fear. She turned to face the city's most powerful man, whom she only knew from business magazine photos. Julian led Elena into a small VIP lounge with luxurious leather armchairs and a glass window overlooking the glittering city. He slammed the door shut, the dry sound cutting off any escape. He turned, his sharp gray eyes piercing into Elena as if to see into her soul. "Explain. Why did you tell me not to sign?" Elena clenched her hands together, her knuckles white, but her voice was courageous and clear. "Because I overheard their meetings, sir. Marcus Thorne and Omnicorp have switched the important appendices of the contract. Once you sign, Apex Dynamics will no longer be yours. The hidden clauses will transfer control of the company to them, pushing you into massive debt while they effortlessly seize the empire you spent a lifetime building." Julian's jaw tightened. Every word she spoke was like a needle pricking his trust. He swept his eyes over Elena's face. She was too young, dressed simply, a cleaning staff member with nothing to lose or gain from this. So what was her motive? Why would someone like you risk everything, your job, your safety, to warn me? He asked slowly, each word a test. Elena lowered her head, an old pain surfacing in her eyes. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything, sir. Years ago, my mother trusted a contract she didn't fully understand. She signed, hoping it would save our small family shop, but instead, it cost us our home, everything. I saw that same trap, those same devious legal terms being set for you." Julian's chest constricted. The girl in front of him wasn't speaking out of ambition, but out of genuine pain. "How do you know those details about my contract?" A cleaning employee wouldn't have access to these documents. The real turning point came when Elena took an old phone from her apron pocket. The screen was cracked, but what it showed was incredibly clear. I clean the office at night, when everyone is gone. I heard them discussing things in Marcus's office. I took pictures of the real contract pages they planned to swap in after you signed. Julian's heart skipped a beat. Let me see, he ordered, his voice almost a whisper. Elena opened her photo gallery. The blurry images showed documents spread out on a desk, with terms highlighted in red. Julian squinted. One page promised Julian would retain a 65% stake after the merger, while another, with a nearly identical layout and font, reduced that number to just 20%. Julian's breathing grew heavy. He had been in the business world long enough to recognize this was a sophisticated fraud, orchestrated by those who knew him best. This is betrayal, he muttered, a bitter taste in his throat. Elena nodded gravely. It's even worse than you think. They don't just want the company, they want to ruin you. Her voice was resolute. They've set it up so all the evidence of the fraud points directly to you, setting you up for jail time. I'll give you all the evidence tonight. Julian looked at the girl in front of him, an anonymous cleaner who had just saved him from the abyss. For a moment, he no longer saw the grey uniform or the cleaning cart. He saw integrity, perseverance, and extraordinary courage. He realized that in his race to the top, he had put too much trust in those closest to him and forgotten that the truth sometimes comes from the most humble of places. He knew that the battle to reclaim what was his had only just begun, and his only ally now was the woman his world had considered invisible. Night fell upon the city, concealing the day's machinations and worries. Julian and Elena met at a small cafe, hidden away in an alley. The dim yellow light shone on old wooden tables, the air smelling faintly of roasted coffee and damp wood. This was a world completely different from the sterile glamour of Apex Dynamics. Elena had swapped her uniform for a simple white shirt and jeans. Her initial shyness was gone, replaced by a surprising calm and intelligence. She placed her laptop on the table, the clicks of her keyboard echoing in the silence. "This is what I've collected," she said, her voice calm, but each word carrying immense weight. Julian held his breath as he looked at the screen. These weren't just a few hurried photos. It was a meticulously woven web of deceit, a silent indictment against the people he had trusted most. First, there were secret audio recordings. Marcus's voice was heartbreakingly familiar, but the content was foreign and ruthless. He was discussing with Isabella Croft, Julian's ex-girlfriend, a cunning lawyer, how to transfer Apex Dynamics assets to an offshore shell company. Once Julian signs, Apex will be ours. Brighton Alliance will handle the paperwork, and you'll transfer his shares to the shell company. He'll be powerless, an empty shell. Marcus's voice rang with smug satisfaction. A woman's laugh replied. Julian immediately recognized it as Isabella's. "He trusts you too much, Marcus. 17 years of loyalty have made him blind. He'll never suspect his own brother." Julian's chest tightened. Brother. A chill ran down his spine. 17 years of friendship, brotherhood, and countless nights spent building the company from scratch, all shattered in an instant. But the biggest shock was yet to come. Elena showed him forged emails created from his own computer. They were sophisticated, using his exact writing style and word habits, with perfectly arranged obscure money transfers to make it look like Julian had embezzled company funds himself. Julian stared at the screen, a cold fury replacing his pain. They didn't just want to take his company, they wanted to bury him. They wanted to make him a criminal, stealing his freedom, honor, and future. He looked up at Elena, his eyes filled with a whirlwind of emotions. "Why did you do all of this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. He couldn't understand. A stranger, someone at the very bottom of the corporate hierarchy, would dare to confront such formidable forces just to save him. Elena looked him straight in the eyes, and for the first time, Julian saw the depth of her soul. "Because it was the right thing to do," she answered simply. Then, as if pulling back a secret curtain, she began to tell her story. "Years ago, I wasn't a cleaner. I was a financial analyst at a prestigious consulting firm. During a joint project, I uncovered a small act of fraud by Marcus. He had nothing back then, but his nature was already cunning. I reported the matter to my superiors, believing I was doing the right thing. She took a deep breath, her eyes distant. But I was naive. He turned the tables. He used his cleverness and connections to convince everyone that I was the one being irresponsible, that I was trying to sabotage him to steal his position. I was fired. Worse, I was blacklisted from the industry. No financial firm would hire me. I took the job as a cleaner at Apex, she continued, to keep an eye on him. I knew his nature would never change. I waited for the day he'd show his true colors, and I was right. She paused, her voice softening as she mentioned another burden. And I also need this job. My sister, Maya, has a congenital heart condition. She needs surgery. It costs $150,000. I had no other choice. Elena's story stunned Julian. He no longer saw just a benefactor, but an extraordinary woman, a silent warrior fighting for justice and for her family, who had turned her own pain into a weapon. The next morning, Julian arrived at the office earlier than usual. He went straight to human resources. "I'd like to see Elena Reyes's file," he said to the department head, without any explanation. What he read in that thin file not only surprised him, but also filled him with shame and admiration. Elena Reyes, an honors graduate in business administration from a prestigious university, a former senior consultant with an impressive track record, with reviews like excellent, sharp, and highly ethical. He realized that this woman had to sacrifice everything: her career, her reputation, her pride, just to survive. He was ashamed for having lived in a world where such a talent had to bow down to clean up others' messes, including his own indifference. He met Elena in an empty hallway as she was preparing for her shift. He no longer saw her as an employee. "Why would someone with your qualifications accept this job?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine respect. Elena looked him straight in the eyes, without a hint of shame or inferiority. "Because after Marcus ruined me, no one saw my value beyond this uniform, sir," she said, her voice calm, but with great weight. "They only saw a cleaner, an invisible person. But I know my worth is not in the clothes I wear, but in what I believe in." That statement awakened Julian. He had lived in a world of expensive suits and glamorous titles for so long that he had forgotten that a person's true value lies in unblemished integrity and courage. He knew he owed Elena not just his career, but a priceless lesson. Armed with irrefutable evidence and an unexpected but incredibly resilient ally, Julian was ready for the fated confrontation. The plan was meticulously crafted, every move carefully calculated by Julian and Elena like a high-stakes chess match. Julian announced an indefinite postponement of the Omnicorp signing, citing the need to re-evaluate data security clauses after a few unusual signs. It was a plausible reason that, despite their frustration, Marcus and Isabella couldn't openly object to. They could only secretly pressure him, believing Julian was simply panicking and desperately stalling. Taking advantage of the temporary chaos, Julian personally went to the company's server room one weekend night. Under the cold blue light of the server racks, he felt like he was stepping into the heart of his empire and the scene of a crime about to be exposed. With the information Elena provided, he quickly found what he needed. It wasn't just the forged contract appendix specifying that 85% of assets would be transferred to Marcus and Isabella. It was a treasure trove of evidence of the conspiracy to frame him: fake emails pre-programmed in a hidden folder, a sophisticated history of phantom transactions created through a backdoor, and even an audio recording of Marcus gloating about his plan to send Julian to prison. Holding the evidence in his hands, Julian's heart turned to ice, but his will to fight burned fiercely. The pain was gone, replaced by an iron determination. The next day, an email from the CEO's office was sent out, calling for an emergency board meeting. The content was brief, regarding Apex Dynamics' strategic future. Marcus and Isabella walked into the boardroom with arrogant confidence. Marcus clapped a few board members on the back, laughing as if he already owned the place. Isabella, in a designer dress, sat down next to him, her sharp eyes scanning everyone, especially lingering on Julian, with a feigned look of pity. They had no idea that the trap they set was about to fall on their own heads. The meeting began in a tense atmosphere. Julian, with an uncharacteristic calm expression, sat at the head of the table, silently observing everything. When everyone was settled, he stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing through the room, "we are not meeting today to discuss Apex's future, but to protect it from the traitors in our midst." A buzz went through the room. Marcus sneered and stood up. "Julian, what are you talking about? Don't act recklessly under a little pressure. Perhaps you should take a break." Julian didn't respond to Marcus. He turned to the door and said loudly, "Please come in, Miss Reyes." The heavy oak door opened. Elena walked in. She was no longer in a cleaning uniform or her usual simple clothes. Today, she wore a well-fitted navy business suit, her hair neatly tied back, exuding the professionalism and confidence of a top financial expert. Her appearance stunned the entire room. Everyone looked at each other, whispering. Isabella looked at her with unconcealed contempt. What could a little cleaner possibly know to be in a board meeting? Isabella spat out the condescending remark. "She knows more than you think," Julian said, then gestured for Elena to begin. "Miss Reyes, please." Elena calmly walked to the head of the table, connecting her laptop to the projector. She presented everything clearly and logically, without a hint of hesitation, as if she had stood before such boards 100 times. "Board members," she began, "the issue isn't whether Apex should merge with Omnicorp, but that we were almost tricked into a trap to lose the company entirely." She projected 2 versions of the contract onto the screen. On the left is the version that was originally approved. On the right is the swapped version that Mr. Vance almost signed. As you can see, Clause 4.1 has been changed, transferring 85% of the controlling shares to an Omnicorp subsidiary, with the direct beneficiaries being Mr. Thorne and Miss Croft here. The room held its breath. All eyes turned to Marcus and Isabella. Marcus tried to remain calm, but sweat had already begun to bead on his forehead. Elena continued, giving no one a chance to collect themselves. She projected the forged emails, explaining in detail how they were created from an internal company IP address, specifically from Marcus's computer, and pre-programmed to be sent automatically after the contract was signed, to create fake evidence accusing Julian of embezzlement. Isabella shot up from her chair, her voice shrill. "This is a complete fabrication. Where's the proof? These are just doctored images. This girl must have been paid by someone to slander us." This was the exact moment Julian and Elena had been waiting for. "Slander?" Elena said, her voice cold. She didn't argue. She simply pressed the play button. Marcus's voice echoed through the room, clear and undeniable. "Once Julian signs, Apex will be ours. He'll be powerless. He trusts me too much. 17 years of loyalty have made him blind." The entire room fell silent. Board members turned to look at Marcus with expressions of horror, disgust, and contempt. His face was ashen, his lips moving silently. He looked at Julian, his eyes pleading, but he only received a look as cold as ice. Isabella tried to salvage the situation, stammering, "That recording, it's illegal. You can't use it as evidence." Julian stood up, his voice now as sharp as a judge's hammer. "All the evidence here was legally obtained within company premises, and it has been verified by our lawyers. Furthermore, it was sent to the authorities this morning." Just then, as if on cue, the boardroom door opened. 2 uniformed police officers and a plainclothes investigator walked in, their faces grim. "Marcus Thorne and Isabella Croft," the investigator said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit slander." Marcus collapsed into his chair, utterly defeated. Isabella let out a frantic shriek as the cold handcuffs locked around her wrists. As he was led away, Marcus turned to look at Julian, his eyes filled with hatred. "You'll regret this, Julian." The door closed, returning a heavy silence to the boardroom. After a few seconds, it was as if a great burden had been lifted. Whispers and sighs of relief filled the air. The nightmare seemed to be over. Julian stood there, quietly, looking toward Elena. She gave him a slight nod, a silent understanding passing between them. But deep down, they both knew this wasn't the end. They had cut off the poisonous snakes in their own home, but their den remained. This victory was only the beginning of a much greater storm. As the whispers in the boardroom subsided, Julian remained, enveloped in a heavy silence. The room, where a spectacular overthrow had just taken place, was now empty. He looked at Elena, who was calmly packing her laptop, and a feeling of profound gratitude welled up inside him. He walked toward her, the space between them no longer the distance between a CEO and an employee, but the closeness of two comrades who had just won a battle together. "Elena," he began, his voice warm and sincere. "What you did today, no words can express it." He paused, looking straight into her eyes. "Apex needs you, not behind the scenes, but in a position worthy of your talent and courage. I need your mind. The real battle begins now. I would like to offer you the position of Vice President of Strategy at Apex Dynamics." Elena was stunned. This offer far exceeded anything she had ever dared to dream of. From a cleaner rejected by the entire financial industry, she was now being offered one of the most powerful positions in the company. A moment of hesitation flickered in her eyes, not from a lack of confidence, but from the magnitude of the change. But then, she saw the absolute trust in Julian's eyes, and she knew she couldn't refuse. "I accept," she replied, her voice resolute, a new chapter of her life officially beginning. "And one more thing," Julian said, taking an envelope from his inner jacket pocket and handing it to her. "This is for your sister's surgery, Maya. Consider it a thank you from Apex, and from me personally. You saved this company's future, and now it's time for the company to take care of your family's future." Elena opened the envelope. Inside was a check with a number that exceeded the surgery cost. With tears in her eyes, she looked up at Julian. The burden that had weighed on her for so long was finally lifted, not just by money, but by the recognition and kindness she had never dared to hope for. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Just when it seemed everything was back on track and a new dawn awaited Apex, a bombshell dropped a few days later, hitting them like a tsunami. Apex Dynamics lawyer called an urgent meeting. "Omnicorp is suing us," the old lawyer announced, his face grim. "They're not just pulling out of the agreement, they're counter-suing." Julian frowned. "On what grounds?" "They were the ones who colluded with Marcus." "That's the worst part," the lawyer continued, placing a thick stack of documents on the table. "They claim they had no knowledge of Marcus's conspiracy. They're saying Marcus and Isabella deceived both sides, and now they're using our own internal scandal as grounds for a lawsuit." The lawyer flipped through the pages, pointing out Omnicorp's malicious arguments. "They're using the very evidence Miss Reyes collected to argue that Apex Dynamics has severe mismanagement, that a major conspiracy could take place right under the CEO's nose, proving the instability of the entire system. They're using that to say we damaged their reputation by dragging them into a risky deal and breached the preliminary contract. They are demanding a massive amount in damages." The number mentioned silenced the entire room. It was enough to push Apex to the brink of bankruptcy. Julian understood immediately. Omnicorp wasn't Marcus's accomplice. They were the puppet masters, using Marcus as a pawn. When their takeover plan through deception failed, they turned to legal means, using his own weapon against him to drive Apex into the ground and then acquire the company for a pittance. The new storm had arrived, and it was far more vicious and cunning than the last one. A fierce legal and financial battle ensued. Julian and Elena's offices became a war room. There was no room for romantic dinners or flowery compliments. Instead, there were long, tense nights in the boardroom, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and complex financial spreadsheets. The thick smell of coffee replaced the scent of perfume. The sound of rustling paper and keyboard clicks replaced soft music. They worked together day and night, two brilliant minds combining into one. Julian, with his business experience and macro-strategic planning ability. Elena, with her sharp intellect, extraordinary data analysis skills, and meticulous attention to the smallest details. They debated fiercely over options, outlining counter-strategies and finding the tiniest loopholes in Omnicorp's hundreds of pages of legal documents. It was in this brutal situation that they saw each other's true selves, raw and undisguised. Julian saw in Elena not just intellect but also an unyielding, resilient spirit. He saw her so tired that she fell asleep at her keyboard, but the next morning she was the first to arrive with a new solution. Elena saw in Julian not just a talented CEO, but also a kind-hearted man and a person of remarkable strength. He was always the last one to leave, making sure she had eaten and encouraging her when things seemed hopeless. Their mutual admiration and trust gradually blossomed into a deep love, a love forged in fire and tested in adversity. Their love was not built on sweet words, but on a foundation of standing shoulder to shoulder. One night, at around 3 a.m., after they had just found a critical loophole in Omnicorp's lawsuit, they sat exhausted, leaning back in their chairs. Julian turned to look at Elena, who was dozing off, a stray lock of hair falling over her intelligent forehead. He gently reached out and brushed it away. In that moment, he knew that this fight was not just about saving the company, but also about protecting the extraordinary woman beside him. After months of tireless fighting, they achieved the impossible. Using the brilliant financial strategies laid out by Elena, combined with Julian's bold legal moves, they turned the tables. They not only proved Apex's innocence but also exposed Omnicorp's dirty tricks in previous deals, causing the giant corporation to suffer severe damage to its reputation and stock price. In the end, Omnicorp was forced to retreat in disgrace, accepting an unfavorable settlement. That night, after receiving the final news of their victory, Julian took Elena to the riverside. The city lights twinkled at night, and the river flowed quietly as if all storms had passed. There was no flashy proposal, no diamond ring or roses. Julian simply took Elena's hand, looking deep into her eyes. "We've been through the biggest storm together," he said, his voice simple and sincere. "I've realized I don't want to walk the path ahead, whether it's peaceful or stormy, without you by my side." Elena smiled, a smile brighter than all the city lights. Happy tears rolled down her cheeks. She said nothing, just squeezed his hand. It was the clearest answer. A few weeks later, they got married in a simple, cozy, and meaningful ceremony, surrounded by their closest friends and Elena's now healthy sister, Maya. The unexpected alliance forged in hardship had now become an eternal one, ready to face whatever life brought their way. The dawn after the storm is always brighter than usual. Under the joint leadership of Julian and Elena, Apex Dynamics not only recovered but was powerfully reborn. This growth was not just in the soaring financial figures on the stock market, but also in a change in the company's culture. Apex became a symbol of ethics, equality, and integrity. Every employee, from the highest level managers to the quietest cleaning staff, felt their voice was heard and respected. Their story of victory against the giant Omnicorp became a legendary case study in the business world. It was not only taught in leading universities as an example of brilliant legal and financial strategy, but also as a profound lesson on the power of courage and truth. The names of Julian Vance and Elena Reyes were mentioned not just with admiration for their talent, but with respect for their character. But they didn't stop there. Julian and Elena knew their legacy had to extend beyond the glass walls of Apex. They established the Elena Reyes Future Fund, a non-profit organization with initial capital drawn from the company's profits. The fund specializes in supporting women and disadvantaged youth in pursuing their dreams in business and technology, providing scholarships to talented young individuals with high ethical standards and the will to succeed. Elena, with her own past, became the most powerful source of inspiration for the younger generation. They never forgot their roots, never forgot the quiet people who had once been a part of Elena's life. Almost every week, Julian and Elena made time to visit the night shift employees. They didn't come as CEO and vice president, but as friends. They brought hot coffee and pastries, sat down, and listened to the stories of security guards and cleaning staff. They expressed their gratitude and reminded everyone that every person, regardless of their position, is an indispensable link in the chain, and that everyone can make a difference. The recognition came naturally. Apex Dynamics was awarded the prestigious Most Ethical Corporation in the Continent Award. When accepting the award, Julian invited Elena to join him on stage. He said, "This award does not belong to me, but to the extraordinary woman beside me. She taught me, taught Apex, and taught the entire business world a lesson. A company's greatest asset is not its stock or its profits, but its integrity." Elena was invited back to her old university, the place that had once shut the door on her career. This time, she didn't come to look for a job, but to speak before thousands of graduating students. Standing on the podium, she recounted her story without a hint of bitterness, only sincerity. "Never let a title or a uniform define your worth," she said. "Your value lies in your heart, in your mind, and in the courage to stand up for what is right, even when you are alone." To honor her contributions and inspiring story, the Apex board, at Julian's suggestion, decided to erect a statue outside the company's headquarters. It was not a statue of a powerful female CEO in a luxurious suit. It was the image of a woman, one hand holding a broom, symbolizing her humble past and her beginning. Her other hand held a briefcase, representing the intellect and success she had achieved. That statue became an eternal reminder that a person's worth is not determined by their starting position, but by the path they choose and the values they uphold. Years later, after Julian and Elena had retired, focusing on their family and their foundation, their story lived on. One autumn afternoon, as Elena was sitting in her garden reading, a young woman came to meet her. The girl looked intelligent and lively, her eyes sparkling with ambition. "Miss Reyes," the girl said, her voice filled with admiration, "I am one of the students who received a scholarship from your foundation. My mother, who used to be an employee at Apex, told me your story, that you saved an entire company and changed everything. That story gave me the courage to pursue my dream of becoming a lawyer who fights for justice." Elena smiled warmly. She looked at the girl, seeing an image of herself from many years ago. She put her book down and took the girl's hand. "I just did what I believed was right, my dear," she replied, her voice gentle, "and I hope you will always do the same. Remember, your strongest weapon is not the law, but truth and courage." Julian and Elena's story was not just recorded in business books or news articles. It was passed on in the hearts of every young person who chose courage and intellect over complacency. It became a living legacy, a fire that never went out, an eternal belief that even in the darkest corners, a whisper of truth, a single act of courage, has the power to change the world.